There is something most people never realize until it's too late. It's not a big wrong decision. It's not a serious stumble. It's just a very small habit, repeated, every day. I once met a man in his 50s. He wasn't poor, not a failure in the way society usually defines it. But sitting in front of me, he said only one simple sentence: "I don't know when everything slipped out of my hands." You see, life rarely collapses overnight. It drifts little by little, like a ship that is off course by just 1 degree. At that moment, you feel nothing. The sea is calm, the wind is gentle. Everything still seems fine. But if you keep going in that direction, you will never reach where you want to go. And the most dangerous thing is that you don't even realize you're heading the wrong way. Maybe you still wake up every morning, still work, still tell yourself, "I'll start taking it seriously tomorrow." I used to be like that. I used to believe I had plenty of time, that one day of delay made no difference, that I could make up for it later. But the truth is, life doesn't work that way. What you do every day does not create results immediately, but it quietly shapes who you become. And there is one habit, very common, very acceptable, very hard to notice, that is quietly destroying the future of many people. Maybe you have it too. In this video, I'm not just talking about a habit. I want you to see yourself in the small moments you usually ignore. Because sometimes what keeps you where you don't want to be is not your circumstances, but the small choices you repeat every day. I remember one time, many years ago, I stood at a small harbor, watching ships preparing to leave the shore. Nothing special, no noise, no dramatic scene, just ships slowly leaving their positions, heading out to the vast ocean. But there is something most people never notice. If the ship's rudder is off by just a very small angle, almost impossible to see with the naked eye, then, after many days at sea, that ship will not reach its intended destination. It will be lost. Not because of storms, not because of big waves, but just because of a very small deviation from the beginning. Your life works the same way. No one wakes up one morning and decides, "Today, I will destroy my future." No one says, "I will waste this life." No, it doesn't happen like that. It starts very lightly, very normally, very reasonably. You postpone an important task just once. You choose what is easy instead of what is necessary just once. You tell yourself, "I'll do it tomorrow," and then tomorrow comes. You say the same thing again. I used to live in that loop without realizing it. There were days I clearly knew what I needed to do, not big things, just simple but important tasks, a call to make, a plan to start, a skill to practice. But I didn't do them, not because I couldn't, but because I chose not to at that moment. I told myself I would come back to it later, that I needed more time, that I wasn't ready yet. And those reasons sounded very reasonable. They even made me feel comfortable. That's the dangerous part. Because this habit doesn't make you feel bad immediately. It doesn't cause pain. It doesn't create obvious consequences that same day. You still live, still work, still feel everything is fine. But beneath that fine, something is changing, very slowly, very quietly, like water dripping on stone. No loud sound, no warning signs, but drop by drop it is eroding the structure inside. You start getting used to procrastination. You start getting used to not keeping promises to yourself. You start getting used to choosing what is easy instead of what is right. And that gradually becomes who you are. I've met many people who told me they don't understand why they aren't progressing. They feel busy. They feel like they're trying. But when they look back, they're still standing still. I don't ask them about goals. I don't ask them about plans. I just ask one simple question. Every day, are you postponing the most important thing? And most of them go silent. Because the truth is, they know. You know too. There is one thing you've known for a long time you should do. One thing that could change your direction. One thing that, if you had started a year ago, your life today would be different. But you still haven't started. Not because you're not smart enough. Not because you lack opportunities. But because you have repeated a habit long enough for it to become default. I realize something very important. The future is not destroyed by big decisions. It is worn away by small but consistent delays. You don't lose your life in one day. You lose it day by day. And the scariest thing is, you don't feel like you're losing anything at all. Until one day, you look back, and you realize you've gone very far from where you once wanted to be. And it all started from something very small. A seemingly harmless choice. A habit you never truly confronted. But that's only the beginning. Because what comes next is even more dangerous. You don't just procrastinate. You start to believe that procrastination is completely normal. There is something I realized after many years of observing people, and you might be surprised to hear this. The habit that is quietly destroying your future is not laziness, not a lack of goals, not even a lack of motivation. In fact, many people who have it are among the hardest working people I've ever met. They wake up early, they work all day, they are always busy, but they still don't move forward. Why? Because the problem is not whether you work or not, but whether you are avoiding the most important thing. I call it a very subtle form of procrastination, not the obvious kind like lying around doing nothing all day, but the kind disguised as busyness. You still work, but you do easier things, familiar things, things that don't force you to face discomfort. You reply to unimportant emails. You rearrange your desk. You read a bit more, prepare a bit more, think a bit more, and then you tell yourself, I'm working. I used to deceive myself like that. There were days I worked nonstop, but at the end of the day, I knew one thing clearly. I had not touched what truly mattered. I had avoided it, not because I didn't know it was important, but because I knew if I started, I would have to face uncertainty. I would have to face the possibility of failure. I would have to face that I might not be as good as I thought. And that is what most people try to avoid, subconsciously. You see, humans are not afraid of working. We are afraid of the feeling of working without knowing what the result will be. We are afraid of being judged, afraid of being wrong, afraid of not being good enough. And to avoid those feelings, we do something very clever. We keep ourselves busy with unimportant things. I once met a businessman. He told me he worked 12 hours a day, no days off, always busy. But when I asked him one simple question, out of those 12 hours, how much time do you spend on actually generating revenue? He went silent. Then he admitted, very little. Most of the time he was doing things that made him feel like he was working but didn't actually move him forward. That is a form of addiction. Addicted to the feeling of doing something. Addicted to the safety of familiar tasks. Addicted to avoiding the things that could truly change your life. And the scariest thing, you don't realize it's a problem. Because society praises busyness. People look at you and say, you're so hardworking. And you start to believe it. You start to believe you're on the right path. Just because you're not standing still. But the truth is, you can move very fast and still go in the wrong direction. I used to be like that. I used to fill my days with all kinds of tasks. I felt disciplined. I felt like I was progressing. But deep down I knew there was something I was avoiding. A decision I hadn't dared to make. An action I knew I needed to take but kept postponing. And as each day passed, it didn't disappear. It only grew bigger. It became an invisible burden. You might be carrying that burden right now. One thing you clearly know, if you do it, your life will change. But you're still procrastinating. You find reasons. You wait for the right time. You say you need more preparation. But in reality, you're avoiding it. And the more you avoid, the more you reinforce that habit. You teach yourself something very dangerous, that when something is difficult, I can postpone it. And once your brain learns that, it will repeat it. Repeat every day until procrastination is no longer a choice. It becomes instinct. That's when your future truly starts to be destroyed. Not because you don't have opportunities, but because you no longer have the ability to take them when they appear. And this leads to something even more dangerous. You don't just procrastinate. You start to justify that procrastination. I once believed in a lie, a very comforting lie. And the dangerous thing is, it sounds completely reasonable. I'll do it tomorrow, when I have more time, when things are clearer, when I'm ready. Have you ever said those things? I have many times. And each time I felt relieved. No more pressure, no more stress. No need to face discomfort at that moment. Just push it to tomorrow. And tomorrow feels like a very safe place. A place where you'll be better, more disciplined, more ready. But you see, that tomorrow you're imagining does not exist. Because when tomorrow comes, it becomes today. And you say again, I'll do it tomorrow. That's the loop. A gentle loop, but a cruel one. I remember a friend of mine, a very smart person. He always had ideas. Always talked about big plans. Always believed he would do something significant. But every time I asked, when do you start? He always smiled and said, soon. His soon lasted for years. He didn't realize he didn't lack ability. He was just believing in a lie, that he still had time. You might be believing that too, that you're still young, that you can start later, that a few days make no difference. But the truth is, Life is not stolen by big decisions. It is stolen by the moments you say, "Not today." Every time you procrastinate, you're not just stepping back one step. You are sending yourself a message. This is not important. And when you repeat that message long enough, you start to believe it. You start lowering your standards. You start accepting a smaller version of yourself. I've been there. I used to look at my goals and clearly know I could achieve them. But every day I chose to wait a little longer, just a little more, until I realized something that truly scared me. It wasn't that I couldn't do it. It was that I was becoming someone who no longer does what he says. And when you lose that, you lose the most important thing. Not money, not opportunity, but trust in yourself. You no longer believe you will do what you say. And when you no longer believe in yourself, every plan, every goal becomes just words. I want you to pause for a moment and ask yourself a very simple question. What is something in your life that you've said "I will do," but still haven't started? Not because you can't, but because you're used to saying, "I'll do it tomorrow." If you see yourself in that question, then maybe this is not just a normal video for you. And if you truly want to change, not with temporary motivation, but with deep internal change, hit subscribe. Not because I need it, but because you need an environment where you are reminded every day that your life is being built from the smallest choices. Because what I'm about to share next is the first price this habit begins to take from you. And it doesn't come the way you think. It's not loud, not obvious. But once you see it, you will never look at your life the same way again. There is a price this habit starts taking very early, but almost no one notices it. It's not money, not opportunity, not even time, at least not yet. It's something much more subtle. I call it the erosion of self-trust. You see, every time you say you will do something and you don't, you're not just delaying an action, you are sending a signal, a very clear signal to your own mind. That, my words are not reliable. I didn't understand this before. I thought that if I delayed something, it was just an unfinished task. Nothing serious. I could always come back to it later, but I was wrong. Because every time I broke a promise to myself, I was quietly damaging the most important relationship in my life. The relationship between me and myself. At first you feel nothing. You still talk about goals, still make plans, still believe you will do it. But after a while, something begins to change. You start hesitating. When you think about starting something important, a small voice appears in your head. Last time I said that too and didn't do it. That voice is not loud, but it's enough to slow you down. Then one more time. You say, "This time I'll be serious." But deep down, you no longer fully believe that. You start doubting yourself. And that's when the real cost begins. I've met very talented people. People with abilities far above average, but they can't move forward. Not because they lack opportunities, but because they no longer believe they will do what they say. They start a project, then abandon it. They set goals, then delay. They promise themselves, then break that promise. And after a while, they stop setting big goals. Not because they don't want to, but because they no longer believe they will follow through. Does that sound familiar? Maybe you used to be very ambitious, very driven, very confident in yourself. But over time, you start choosing smaller goals, safer ones, less risky ones. Not because you became weaker, but because you lost something very important. The belief that you can trust yourself. I realized something very profound. Discipline is not just action. Discipline is a promise you keep with yourself. And every time you break that promise, you don't just lose a productive day. You lose a part of your confidence, a part of your identity, a part of who you could become. This doesn't happen immediately. It's like a very small crack in a piece of glass. At first you don't notice, but over time, that crack spreads until just a small pressure and everything shatters. I've been at that point. It wasn't that I didn't know what I needed to do. It was that I wasn't sure I would do it anymore. And that is a very dangerous feeling. Because when you lose trust in yourself, you start looking for certainty from the outside. You wait for motivation. You wait for inspiration. You wait for a perfect moment. But those things never come the way you expect. And while you wait, time keeps moving. Opportunities keep passing. And you remain there, not because you can't move forward, but because you no longer believe you will. I want you to pause for a moment and be honest with yourself. How many times have you said you would change, but then return to old habits? Not once, not twice, but enough for you to start doubting yourself. If you are there, understand this one thing. The problem is not that you are weak. The problem is you have repeated a pattern long enough for it to become your reality. But that's not the most dangerous part yet. Because after you lose trust in yourself, this habit will start doing something else. It will quietly erode who you are little by little without you even noticing. I once saw a rock, large, solid, seemingly unbreakable. But what caught my attention was not its size. It was a small dent, created by drops of water falling on it. Not a storm, not a strong force, just water, drop by drop, day after day. And over time, the rock began to change shape. You see, your life is not destroyed by big blows. It is worn down by small things repeated long enough. Just like the habit we are talking about, it doesn't make you collapse immediately. It doesn't create a clear moment for you to say, this is when everything started going wrong. No, it does something far more dangerous. It changes you gradually. So gradually that you don't notice. I used to live in that state. I still worked, still had goals, still believed I was on the right path. But there was something I didn't notice. My standards were dropping very slightly. Very hard to detect. Things I would never have ignored before started becoming acceptable. Promises I used to take very seriously became something I could be a little flexible with, just a little. But that little repeated every day. And then I realized something that really made me think. You don't lose discipline in one moment. You lose it, little by little. Just like you don't become weaker after one day of not exercising. But if you skip enough days, your body will change. Quietly, without warning. Just different. Your mind works the same way. Every time you choose to procrastinate, every time you avoid what matters, you are training yourself to become someone else. Not with words, but with actions. You start becoming someone who easily ignores difficult things, easily postpones important things, easily accepts mediocrity. And the scary part is, you don't feel like you're declining. You just feel everything is still fine. I once spoke with a man. He wasn't a failure, not poor, didn't face any major crisis. But when he looked back at his life, he said something I will never forget. I don't know when I became this person. That is erosion. No specific moment. No single day when everything collapses. Just every day a little. And then one day you look back and you don't recognize yourself. You are no longer the person who once had big dreams. You are no longer the person who once dared to start. You are no longer the person who once believed you could do something meaningful. Not because you lost ability, but because you lost the habit of action. I realized something very important. Who you become is not the result of big decisions. It is the sum of small choices repeated every day. If every day you choose to procrastinate, you're not just delaying a task. You are building a version of yourself that you never wanted, and that happens very slowly. So slowly that you don't see the danger. Like you don't feel a rock being destroyed until its shape has completely changed. I want you to pause for a moment and ask yourself, over the past few years, have you become better or just more used to procrastinating? It's not about what you are doing today. It's about who you are becoming every day. Because if you don't realize this in time, this habit will continue and it will take you to a very dangerous place. A place where you feel extremely busy, but in reality, you are not moving forward at all. There is a trap that many intelligent people fall into, and they are even proud of it. It is busyness. I used to believe that if I was always busy, then I must be moving forward. My schedule was full. My days were packed. There was always something to do, and that made me feel like I was living with purpose. But then one day I stopped and asked myself a very simple question. If I keep living like this for the next 5 years, will my life actually change? The answer made me go silent, because deep down I knew I was moving a lot, but not going anywhere. You may have felt that before. A day passes very quickly. You do a lot of things. You feel tired. But when you look back, you can't point to one truly important thing that you completed. You just feel that you were busy. That is an illusion, a very dangerous illusion, because it makes you believe you are progressing when in reality you are standing still. I once met a young man very hardworking. He worked from morning to night, always busy, never sitting still. But when I asked him, out of everything you did today, which one actually brought you closer to your goal, he didn't answer immediately. He thought for a long time, and then he said something very honest. Maybe not much. You see, being busy is not progress. Doing more does not mean doing the right things. You can spend the whole day doing small tasks, easy tasks, tasks that make you feel productive, but if you avoid the most important thing, you are still procrastinating, just in a more subtle way. I realize that there are two types of work in every person's life. One type keeps you busy. One type changes your life. And the irony is, the second type is usually the hardest to start. It requires you to think deeper, to face uncertainty, to accept the possibility of failure, and that's why you avoid it. Not because you are lazy, but because you are human. You choose comfort by instinct, and so you fill your days with unimportant things. So you don't have to face the important thing. I lived like that for a long time. I woke up with a long list of tasks. I completed most of them, and at the end of the day, I felt like I had worked hard. But deep down, I knew there was one thing I had avoided. One thing that if I did it, my life would change. But I didn't do it, and I repeated that day after day, until I realized something. Busyness can become a hiding place. A place where you escape from the truth. A place where you don't have to face the hardest question. Am I living up to my potential? Because when you truly stop and face that question, you can't pretend anymore. You will see clearly you don't lack time. You don't lack ability. You are just spending your time on things that don't matter. I want you to try something. Look back at your day yesterday. Not how many things you did, but how many of them were truly important. How many of them, if you kept doing for 1 year, would change your life? If the answer makes you uncomfortable, that's not a bad thing. That's the truth. And the truth is always the starting point. Because once you see it, you can't go back to how you were before. But this is not the deepest point yet. Because there will be a moment when you can no longer avoid it, a moment when you are forced to look back and realize how far off course you have gone. There is a moment when you can no longer run, not because someone tells you, not because a big event happens, but because you see it yourself very clearly. I remember one evening I sat alone, no noise, no work to distract me, just silence and the thoughts I had been avoiding for a long time. And for the first time, I didn't try to keep myself busy anymore. I just sat there and looked back, looked at what I said I would do, looked at the plans I once believed were important, looked at the opportunities that came and went. And then I realized something. It wasn't that I lacked ability. It wasn't that I lacked opportunities. It was that I didn't act when I needed to act. Not once, but many times, enough to create a gap between who I could become and who I am. Have you ever felt that gap? It's not a clear feeling. It's like a quiet disappointment. A sense that you know you could do better, but you don't. You know you could go further, but you stay still. And when you realize that, it's not comfortable. No motivation, no inspiration, just truth. I used to try to avoid that moment. I filled my time. I kept myself busy. I told myself everything was fine. But the truth always waits for you. And when it comes, it doesn't ask if you are ready. It just shows you where you are. And you can't pretend anymore. You can't say you didn't know. You can't blame circumstances. You can't say you didn't have opportunities. Because deep down, you know how many times you procrastinated. You know what you avoided. You know how many times you said tomorrow without ever actually starting. That is the moment of awakening, not when you feel motivated, but when you can no longer lie to yourself. I sat in that moment for a long time. No plan, no immediate solution. Just one question repeating in my mind. If I keep living like this, who will I become in 5 years? And the answer made me go silent. Because it was not the person I wanted to become, not because I couldn't, but because I didn't act. And that is the most painful thing, not failure, but knowing you could have done better, but you didn't. I believe that everyone will have a moment like that. A moment when you look back and clearly see the path you've taken, not through someone else's words, but through your own experience. And in that moment, you have two choices. You can turn away, keep being busy, keep procrastinating, or you can face it, accept the truth, and start changing. Not tomorrow, but right now, because if you ignore that moment, this habit will not stop. It will continue, and the price you pay will not just be a feeling. It will become years of your life that you cannot get back. There is something most people don't understand until they begin to feel it. The cost of procrastination is not a lost day, not a week, not even a single opportunity. The real cost is years. I used to think that if I procrastinated today, I could make up for it tomorrow. that time was something flexible, that as long as I tried a little harder later, everything would be fine. But life doesn't work that way. Time does not wait for you, and it does not come back. Every day you procrastinate doesn't just pass. It accumulates, like interest but in reverse. You don't see it immediately, but over time it becomes a very large number. I once met a man in his 60s. He didn't talk about big failures, didn't mention any major events, didn't blame anyone. He just said very slowly, "I had a lot of time, but I didn't use it properly." You may hear that and think it's simple, but when you look into his eyes, you will understand that is not just a sentence, it is a truth he has to live with. You see, you don't feel the cost of procrastination when you are young, because you always think you still have time. You think 1 year is not much, that a few years passing is not significant. But then one day, you look back, and you don't see the days that were lost. You see the gap between where you are and where you could have been. You see others moving forward. You see opportunities no longer there. You see doors that have closed, not because you weren't good enough, but because you didn't walk through them when they were still open. I realized something very clearly. Procrastination doesn't just slow you down. It changes your direction. Every time you say later, you are turning onto a different path. An easier path, less pressure, but also a path that doesn't lead where you want. And if you repeat that long enough, you won't need a big decision to fail. You will drift. I once asked someone, if you keep living the way you are now for the next 10 years, what will your life look like? He didn't answer right away. He was silent. Then he said something very honest. I don't want to think about that. That is a sign, not of lack of confidence, but of a truth you are trying to avoid. Because deep down, you know the path you are on doesn't lead where you want, but you keep going, not because you can't change, but because you have become used to procrastinating, and that is more dangerous than any failure. Because failure can teach you, but procrastination takes away your chance to start. I want you to imagine something, not 1 year, not 2 years, but 5 years from now. If you keep your current habits, where will you be? Who will you be? How will you feel looking back at today? That answer is the cost. Not something you will pay later, but something you are paying right now, every day, every choice. And if you don't stop, that cost will keep increasing, silently, without warning, until you can no longer do anything to change it. But there is something many people don't realize. You don't have to pay that cost. Not if you change, starting from this moment. After everything I've been through, I realized something very simple. Change does not start with a big decision. It starts with a very small choice. Not tomorrow, not when you feel more ready. But right now, I used to wait for a perfect moment. A time when I felt confident enough, clear enough, motivated enough. But that moment never came. And then I understood. You don't act when you are ready. You become ready when you act. The difference between those who move forward and those who stay still is not ability. It is who starts even when not perfect. I started with very small things. Not changing my whole life in one day. Not setting huge goals. Just one thing. One thing I had been postponing. And I did it immediately. No more thinking. No waiting. No excuses. Just do it. And the strange thing is, that small action didn't just change the result. It changed how I saw myself. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could trust myself. Not because I did something big, but because I kept my word to myself. You see, confidence doesn't come from positive thinking. It comes from evidence. Evidence that you do what you say. And every time you do that, you don't just complete a task. You rebuild a part of who you are. I began to realize that discipline is not a burden. It is a way for you to respect yourself. Every small action is a statement. I am someone who keeps my word, and when you repeat that long enough, you don't need motivation anymore. You don't need inspiration. You just keep going. Not because you feel like it, but because that is who you have become. I didn't change my life in one day, but I changed my direction in a moment. The moment I stopped saying later and started saying now. And if you are hearing this, I don't want you to think about changing everything. I just want you to think about one thing you have known for a long time that you need to do, not tomorrow, not next week, but today, right after this video ends. Because if you keep waiting, the old habit will come back. It will tell you, no need to rush, but you already know the truth. You have seen the cost. And now you have a choice, not a big choice. Just, will you act or will you keep procrastinating? And from that choice, your future begins to change. You see, life doesn't change just because you understand something. It changes when you start acting on what you understand. The habit we talked about today is not loud, not obvious, but it is powerful enough to shape your entire future, not in one day, but in every day. Every time you say later, you are moving away from who you could become. And every time you choose to act, even in a small way, you are moving back. I don't believe life is determined by big moments. I believe it is built from very small choices, repeated every day. You don't need to become perfect. You don't need to change everything. You just need to stop delaying the most important thing. Start there. Because when you change one habit, you don't just change your actions. You change how you see yourself. And when you change how you see yourself, your life cannot remain the same. If you feel this video speaks to you, hit like. If you want to keep being reminded that your life is being built every day, hit subscribe. And if you know someone who is living in procrastination without realizing it, share this video with them. Before you leave, I want to ask you one question. Not for you to answer me, but for you to answer yourself. What in your life have you known for a long time you need to do, but are still delaying until today? Be honest, because that answer might be where your life begins to change. As I always believe, success doesn't come from big leaps, but from small steps repeated every day. And if you start even with just one small step today, you are already ahead of many people who are still waiting for tomorrow. I truly appreciate you staying until the end of this video.